Hello again, welcome back to TerraFirmaCraft HardRock. In today's episode we're going to go through how to process the ore that we mined last time. That's going to involve us washing it with a sluice and making a quern to crush it. We're also going to run through how to make a crucible to melt that ore down more efficiently, and also how to use an anvil to forge that metal into various tools. If you enjoy these videos, please remember to like and subscribe. It helps me out an awful lot and lets me know that you would like to continue to see more. Now, in our last episode, I laid out the process that I used for mining, particularly in this early stage of the game. So I'll just very quickly show you what the kind of end result of that looks like. So this is the copper mine that I started last time, and you can see that it is kind of been quarried down layer by layer until there is hardly any copper left. There is still a little bit left just in the walls over this way and throughout the cave, but I don't think it's worth risking a cave in just for those extra few pieces of copper. As you can see, I did get quite a lot of copper from that. Now you may also notice there are a few minor changes around the base, namely the fact that there are some more chests. I just cleared a little bit more woodland over there and also replanted some trees because we will be using that wood type later for building. I also was periodically running back just to kind of harvest the silk from those leaves, so we do have quite a lot of string, and we may look into making ourselves a bed a little bit later. But on to our first note, that is making a hammer, because the first thing you need to do with this ore is crush it. Now there is a few different ways that you can do that later in the game, but for now we are going to be relying on a hammer. So our first one will just be a stone hammer. So we're going to need a stone hammerhead, and you can see the shape just there. So if we go ahead and grab ourselves some stone, which I believe I put in here, and we mimic that shape. If I remember correctly, it was that. We now have a stone hammerhead. Grab ourselves some sticks, and we now have a hammer. So if we go ahead and just grab ourselves a pile of that, any kind will do for now, put that in a crafting table, and you can turn it into rocky chunks of that ore. Now you can see in the description of that, it tells you the next step is going to be to use a sluice, which we will be setting up shortly. But before we do that, we're just going to go ahead and make ourselves a quern. Now, one of the things that you need for a quern, just drop this hammer off and pop this back in here. If we have a look at the recipe, you have the quern itself, which takes some smooth and some raw forms of any rock type. But you also need, I believe it's called a headstone, but it is actually a handstone. You're going to need 2 more raw chunks. So in total we're going to need 4. I don't think you need more smooth. But we may as well check. Oh yes we do. So we're going to need 6 and a chisel, which we will make shortly. Now, to get raw rock kinds, the main way to do it at this portion of the game, and the easiest way I've found, is to look on your map and you're going to try and find some of the little outcroppings that look a little bit like these here. So if we just go ahead and make our way towards one of those, there's a particular way you have to go about mining these in order to get the raw versions of the rocks. Somewhere over here I've seen one. Here you go. So you can see that this is made of raw dolomite. However, if we were to just go ahead and mine that with our pick, you will see that it will break into just your normal rocks. So the way you actually go about getting it as raw is you need to mine all of the blocks around the one you're trying to get and allow gravity to make it fall. And that gives you the raw version. So as you can see here, if I just make it so that there are no connection points directly to this one on the corner, like so, you will see that will just pop off and give us the raw version just like so. So I'm going to repeat that a few times. So I now have our 8 raw dolomite. I think I may have actually needed 6, not 8, but spare never hurts. So if we just go ahead and make our way back to base, we can begin making our quern. Now, it is a later step in the process, but we are going to need it regardless. So there's no harm in doing it in this order. we of course need that handstone, which is just raw and a twig, which we can just do here. We have ourselves a handstone, and then we need the quern itself, which we are going to need raw, but we also need smooth. So I'm going to have to make a chisel because I do not have one of those yet. Now I'm going to use the method that you saw in some of the previous episodes, which will just be a pit kiln with a vessel in it with just enough copper to pour into a chisel mold. Just while that pit kiln is going, I will harvest these leaves, and we're just going to very quickly go through using the loom. It's quite a simple process, and we still don't quite have enough string for everything we need at this stage in the game, but we have enough to make a start. So if I just go ahead and grab all of our string and come over to our loom, which we made earlier, you simply need to hold right click until you hit the amount of string you need, which as you can see at the top is 24. When you've hit that, you just right click it and you'll see that progress go up at the top. You need to just keep right clicking it until you get, in this case, a silk cloth. The amount would be slightly different depending on if we were using plant fiber or anything like that. But we need, I believe, 3 for a bed, 3 for a sleeping bag ideally, and 3 for a second sleeping bag to make into a backpack to expand our inventory size. Now I did decide to try and be clever here and do both at once, both the mold and the vessel, so hopefully we can be quick enough to do them both in the same pit kiln, of which we can. Just need to wait for that to cool down. We can put our vessel back in here. I just had to run over to one of the copper deposits and just pick up a few more the malachite chunks on the surface, just so I didn't have to sit there and sift through some more gravel to get just enough copper. This should be, yeah, it's now solid. And we have ourselves a chisel head. So we turn that into our chisel. And then grab this. We needed 2, I believe. So yeah, I did get too many, but oh well. That is fine. So some smooth, and then I believe the recipe, is it raw with smooth on top? Yes. So if we just pop that there, so it's quern on the bottom, handstone on the top. Now, as I mentioned, we don't actually need that just yet, but we will do in the near future. It is one of the steps in ore processing. So the next thing we need to do, as it tells us, is wash the ore. Now at this stage, that will be using something called a sluice. And it is a very simple recipe. It's just 3 lumber and 3 sticks of any kind. Now you can use twigs, I just use sticks because that is what I have on hand. So it is simply just like that. Now in terms of setting one of these up, we need water. Now we could use the river just down there, but due to the fact that piranhas are quite a fan of swimming around in there, and I would prefer not to get eaten while I wash ore, we are instead going to use the small amount of water we had just over here. Now, to set this up, you need water to run 7 blocks in one direction and then place the sluice one after it. So I'm going to set up a quick rig to make that work. Now we're going to be using chests and hoppers just so that we can almost make it automated, so we can just dump in a load of ore and not have to worry about it. So as you can see, I have made a very basic washing setup just by digging this out until the water stops and then adding a sluice onto the end. I also added a trapdoor, it should be like that, a hopper and a chest underneath, just so that it automatically collects what is washed. This is kind of optional, but I prefer it as a kind of quality of life feature. The trapdoor's there just because the items can kind of go in various different directions, so that just helps control them go straight into the hopper. Now I have just tested this with a piece and it does work. So if you just go ahead and throw a piece into the water, you can throw stacks at a time. It will then go onto the sluice, as you can see there, and shortly it will pop off into the hopper at the bottom and straight into the chest. and we will then have a chunk of malachite. So I'm going to sit here and just do a little bit of washing, and then we'll move on to the next step. So you can now see we have our chunks as well as some byproducts. Now the dirty piles, I believe you can combine those with 4 dirty piles to make a full-sized one, which is what we'll get to in a second, but for now that is effectively just a byproduct. In this case we also got some andesite, which is worth keeping because andesite is a core part of the create mod, which we will be utilizing a lot later on. It's not the only way of getting it, but it is a nice byproduct to have because it is in itself useful. Now the next step for us is to come over to our Quern, right click with our chunks, and then right click again to turn the Quern and turn it into its powdered form, which you can see just there. Now at this stage of the game, things like this are very time consuming, but you can almost automate these a little bit later on. So you can see we now have the full-sized dirty dust, which we would then need to go and wash again in the sluice. So you can see there are multiple steps. We have to wash it twice. This can take a very long time. So I'm going to spend some time just crushing and washing some of what we have here, not all of it, because that would take a very long time and we don't need that much yet. So I did tell a little bit of a lie. I did actually spend the time to process all of the copper ore. So you can see here that we have rather a lot of malachite powder, which we would need to smelt and then pour into either ingots to forge or directly into tool molds. Quick tip with this is that you can save space with ore powder simply by turning it with 4 like so into pellets. So we'll just do that. And you can further save space if you have a lot of it by turning them to what I believe is pronounced briquettes. Now, I don't know if there is an advantage to doing this when it comes to smelting, because I believe that it scales with the amount of ore that you are smelting at a time. So as you can see, it converted to 80 millibuckets of copper within 1 briquette, which is a perfect ratio. You don't lose anything there, but it does just mean that you can store more in less space. Now, with this malachite powder, we have a couple of options. We are of course going to need it for tools and other things to progress. Now at this point we could either use the pit kiln method and smelt all of that using a vessel and then pouring it into molds, or we can make ourselves a crucible, which is what we're going to do to expedite that process. Now to make a crucible, we are going to need something called fire clay. Now fire clay simply uses clay, which I did spend a little bit of time gathering some more of in the immediate area, but we're also going to need graphite powder and kaolinite powder. I think it's kaolinite, again is how you pronounce that. Now these two things can be the bane of your existence. They can be really difficult to find or really easy. Now I already know where some is because I found it on the way over, but as a quick tip as to how to find these, if I find a graphite ping for example, if you zoom in really, really far on your map, you may see that there are different coloured pieces of terrain on the map. If you hover over them that are slightly lighter, it will give you, in some cases, an ore sample. So you can see at the bottom of the screen there, it says graphite ore sample. So I never actually went over here directly. I didn't notice this on the way over. But just by going back and zooming in, I can tell you there is graphite there. Kaolinite, on the other hand, I did just find while I was looking around for copper. But you can see that I also have things like salt pinged. I've never been directly over this, but it is a halite sample, and the same for coal. So there's just a little tip for finding them. So as you can see, I have spent some time collecting and processing some graphite and kaolinite. I've also made a little bit of fire clay and also napped it into a crucible. Now, just as a thing to note, you are also going to need some casting channels as well as mold tables in order to be able to cast your molten metal into whatever shape you desire. So I'm going to make a few of those and then pit kiln them, and then I will set up the crucible. So as you can see, I have finished pit kilning all of the fire clay related things. So you simply put your crucible on top of your forge, and then you have your channels running out, and then connect your mold tables to them. Now I have spent the time also pit kilning a few more ingot molds, and I've put those in there. You can also replace these with things like tool head molds for the various different tools, but there is a better way to make those tools that makes them more efficient at their job. So that's likely what we're going to do. Now, the next thing we need to make, ideally, would be a stone anvil. And to do that, if we come to our book, you can see that I was looking at it. We need an igneous extrusive rock or an igneous intrusive rock, and they need to be raw. Now, unfortunately, that does not include the dolomite that is surrounding us, which leaves us with a little bit of an issue. We need to go ahead and find some igneous, intrusive, or extrusive rocks. Now, I am going to have to go ahead and do that and bring back 3 pieces of that to make a primitive stone anvil. I was able to go ahead and grab some of the rock of that description simply by looking at my blaze map, and you can see that there are these smaller patches of kind of orangey brown which are granite, which does fit the criteria you need for a stone anvil. So all we have to do now is lay our 3 pieces of raw stone next to each other like that, and then simply right click on the top of the middle one with your hammer, and you now have yourself a stone anvil. Now the next step from here will be to light the forge and begin smelting down some copper. So we simply need to go ahead and grab some of our charcoal, which is just in here. We need ourselves a fire starter, and we'll need to grab ourselves some copper. So I don't know, we'll just grab a little bit for now. So we light our forge like we did before, simply by putting your charcoal in the forge, just shift right click it, and you can see that our forge is now heating up. Then we just open up our crucible, and you can see we have a 3x3 grid here, which is simply where you can put whatever it is you'd like to smelt. Now each of the metal types does have a temperature at which it melts. You can see that for copper it is 1080 degrees C. So we simply need to wait for both the crucible and the pieces of copper to get up to that temperature. And then you'll see it melt. You can now see that that copper has melted. It's no longer here and is instead turned into liquid in here. You can see how much is in there simply by this little piece at the top, and that will list all of your metals as well as when they alloy and mix together what the alloy creates. Now you can see we have 720 millibuckets. I have 5 mold tables with 5 ingot molds in them. You simply do that just by right clicking with the ingot mold, and to pour it into the ingot molds you just want to right click the casting channel that is directly connected to your crucible, and you'll see that it will begin to pour. Now each one of these ingot molds holds 100 millibuckets, so generally it's good to follow the advice I mentioned in one of the previous episodes. You want to be working with round 100s ideally, just so that you don't end up with a little bit either stuck in an ingot mold or stuck in the crucible. Now you can of course reheat it to melt it again, or top up the ingot mold, but you can just end up with these massive piles of ingot molds with little pieces of different metals in them that you can't really get out until you have enough metal to fill them. It just becomes a little bit of a headache to deal with storage wise. So ideally, how much is one of these? 80. If we go ahead and chuck one more of those in there, that will bring it up to 300. Now at this point we are just waiting for these ingot molds to cool down. You'll see the texture change just like that, and that simply means that they are full. Now if you just right click on one of these, you can pull the ingot straight out of the mold. Alternatively, you can shift right click, and I believe it picks up the ingot mold with the ingot in it, but if you then take it out with it in your hand, it seems to break the mold more consistently. So if you'd like to save yourself some molds and in turn save yourself some clay, it's better to just right click it straight out of the ingot mold. Now as you can see, we have 23 ingots just after a little bit of smelting them into their ingots, and I've stacked them nicely like this. This is just a good way to store them in the early game because you don't really want to use chest space, but it is of course less space efficient than just having them in a chest. And to do that you simply shift right click with an ingot in your hand and you'll make a little pile. A block contains 64 of these ingots. It looks quite nice in my opinion, so I tend to do it. Now, something that I completely forgot about the stone anvil is that it can only be used for welding ingots, which means the first thing we actually need to make will be a copper anvil. Now, if you were slightly savvy, you could skip ahead to bronze at this point. You could go ahead and grab yourself some bismuth and combine it with your copper to straight away make a bronze anvil. We're not going to do that purely just because if you don't have access to that in your world, you may be skipping a vital step. Now, to weld things, because if we have a look at a copper anvil, you can see that we need, what's that, 7 double copper ingots, which means we need 14 ingots. We of course have enough for that. And to do that, using 2 of them, you weld them in an anvil with flux. Now to get flux, we can simply crush our dolomite into flux with a hammer. Luckily we have quite a bit of that already just stored up. So if we crush that into our flux, 30 should be plenty. Now, if you open up your UI, you can see there is a spot there for flux. I will run through how you properly forge tools when we get to a stage when we can do that. The stone anvils can only be used for welding. Now, you don't need to put the hammer in there because we need it in our hands. So we're going to need to make 7 double ingots using 14 of these ingots. So if I just go ahead and grab 14 of them, to weld them, you simply need to heat them up in a crucible and then shift right click with 2 ones that are hot enough to be welded, and then follow that up with a shift right click from your hammer. Now, this can be a little bit of a tough process purely because if you let it go for too long, the ingots will melt. So you'll see that temperature begin to climb, and you'll see in a moment when it is ready to be welded. Now, you'll see at this point that it says can work. That just means that you could use it and forge it with a hammer. We want it to get to as close to 1080 degrees as possible without reaching it, just so we have plenty of time to weld them. So we'll probably stop around about there, and we will shift right click. You do need to be relatively quick with our 2 ingots, and shift right click again with our hammer in our hand. And you can see we now have a double copper ingot. So we have now managed to get ourselves enough double ingots in order to make ourselves our first proper anvil. Now, they do not stack, unfortunately, because they are still at varying levels of heat, but we can still craft with them, like so. And we now have ourselves our first proper anvil. So if we just place that there, we do actually no longer need this stone one, so we can get rid of it. So you can see that this is our UI for our anvil. Now, you want to put your ingot in the rightmost of these 2 slots. Your hammer goes in this one always, and your flux in this one. Now, to decide what it is you're going to forge, you'll need to use the plans menu. So you can see out of copper we have all of these options. I think the first thing we're going to start with will be a hammerhead, just for the time being. So you simply click on the thing you would like to make. Now you can see that this red arrow has moved up here. That is our target. We need to get this green arrow to where this red one is, with a couple of stipulations. If you come to the top here, you can see you have what is effectively the final 3 things you need to do. In this case, it is just 2, which is nice. But you can see that we need to shrink not last, so at some point in the sequence, and we need to punch last. Now, each one of these 8 buttons, if you will, they are actual blacksmithing moves from what I understand, has a name. So you can see that we need to shrink at some point during this, which will just be this one, and we need to punch as the very last move. Now, for a quick tip for smithing, because this can be very difficult to figure out when you're first doing it, is if you come to your options and resource packs, you will have one just here with TFC_TNG, all of that stuff. If you just go ahead and put that on, you'll notice that it will in fact change the way that your UI looks. So you can see now that our UI has changed a little bit. We actually now have a numbered scale, and all of these various moves, I'm going to continue to call them, also have a numbered value. So you can see that our target is, by the looks of it, 99, I believe we need to get to. And you can see that the last couple of things we need to do will be a +16 followed by a +2. So using a little bit of maths, if you will, you can actually figure out what you need to go up in order to forge. Now, what I like to do personally is I have a spreadsheet, because these recipes are seed specific. I believe they're seed specific. They might be world specific, so they might not transfer even between seeds. I do not know, but they are random. So it only really works for the world you are playing. With that in mind, I like to record my recipe, so if I ever need to make, in this case, another copper hammer because this one breaks, I can just resort back to my spreadsheet and just copy the recipe without me having to remember it every single time or figure it out. So I have again waited until it is almost melting, select my hammerhead, and the method that I have come up with is five times the 16 plus the 7 minus the 6 plus 16 and plus 2, because those were the final 2 things we needed. Now you can see that this hammerhead says it is perfectly forged. The amount of hits that it takes for you to forge something determines its quality. From, I believe it is poorly forged all the way up to perfectly forged. That has various multipliers on it that basically make the tool more efficient or have more durability depending on what it is. So a pickaxe would have more durability, and I believe it would also mine faster. For a hammer, it should just affect the durability, I believe. So it is worth going for perfectly forged, which is why I would recommend using this resource pack just to make it a little bit easier for yourself. If you don't, you kind of have to go down more of a trial and error sort of thing, where you just hit the metal with various things, trying to make your last hits whatever they may need to be, which can get a little bit frustrating if you just can't quite get it and you end up spending ages trying to forge the same thing. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just forging myself up some more copper tools, probably one of each kind, just so that everything in the future is a little bit quicker. If you made it this far, thank you for watching all the way through. Drop me a little comment down there letting me know you watched it all. If there's anything you think I need to improve on, also let me know. I'm very new to this myself. Again, thank you for watching all the way through. Have a good rest of your day and a good week, and I'll see you in the next one.